This is Mark Mullinax, and welcome back to Power for the Peaceful, a podcast and class on Taoism. Today, Episode 7, The Womb.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
Before our body existed, one energy was already there, like jade, more lustrous as it's polished, like gold, brighter as it's refined. Sweep clear the ocean of birth and death, stay firm by the door of total mastery, a particle at the point of open awareness. The gentle firing is warm.
First, let's hear this verse in several editions. We'll begin with my translation, read by this episode's quote reader and question asker, Nancy Hastings Sehested from Asheville, North Carolina.
The womb of everything. The valley spirit has always endured. She is deathless, subtle, and countercultural, always pulsing and creating. You might name her Inscrutable Mother. From her womb every creation flows, ever presenting yet never twice the same. Your use cannot drain her.
And now I offer 8 other translations of the first line of this verse. By doing so, I hope these other translations can expand our regard for the importance of this verse's teachings. Feng Jiafu and Jane English translated it this way. The valley spirit never dies. It is the woman, primal mother.
Arthur Whaley. The valley spirit never dies. It is named the mysterious female.
Thomas Cleary. The valley spirit not dying is called the mysterious female.
Ron Hogan. Tao is an eternal mystery, and everything starts with Tao.
Kwok, Palmer, and Ramsey. The Tao is the breath that never dies. It is a mother to all creation.
Ursula K. Le Guin. The valley spirit never dies. Call it the mystery, the woman.
Red Pine. The valley spirit that doesn't die we call the dark womb.
Finally, Jonathan Starr. Endlessly creating, endlessly pulsating. The spirit of the valley never dies. She is called the hidden creator.
Other translations of the Chinese word here for female bring a rich vocabulary to supplement what Nancy and I have read so far. Abstruse womb, dark female, mother of heaven, mother of the abyss, mother substance of the deep, mystic, mysterious female, mysterious feminine element, profound female, mystery of passivity, and subtle female.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
you would be good to ask if there is a creation story to Tao or one in the Tao Te Ching. No, not exactly. No, when the world was young or in the beginning. No, once upon a time. None of those stock opening phrases that begin the hundreds of creation stories around our world. This verse 6 is not Tao's creation story per se, but its creation process of Tao that points us to a creative energy beginning all things. Verse 6 does not tell how things got here, but you might want to look ahead to verses 38 and 51 for more creation insights. Tao is the mother of all, but we begin with an interesting dilemma. The Tao Te Ching was almost certainly written by men at a time when perpetual conflict was the order of the day. But note this, Tao Te Ching's solution to conflicts throughout its entire 81 verses is to encourage the adoption of a countercultural, non-aggressive, and feminine attitude, especially starting in this landmark verse 6. This verse features female ciphers, a feminine life force, mother creator essence, a valley spirit, and the place from which all particles of creation originate. The word valley here in Chinese means nourishing. So to be clear, Tao is talking about a womb, an organ, an organic process that brings forth through emptiness, useful emptiness. And I don't want to get all mystic on you, but this verse teaches that in creation itself, it is the feminine power who creates all that is created. It is this spirit of creation who is constantly with us and never exhausted. Nothing would exist without this feminine, sacred, subtle, nourishing energy. Earth Mother's too small a term. Cosmic mothering principle, not strong enough. But these phrases all point us to a revolutionary and countercultural teaching.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
It's in verse 6 we hear for the very first time that Tao is going to be talked about in human or anthropomorphized terms. And Lao Tzu chooses feminine language. Some scholars believe Lao Tzu had a woman as a teacher. But let's get one thing straight. Lao Tzu is not really saying Tao is a she. Lao Tzu has spoken of Tao as wordless in verse 1, as non-discriminating and non-hierarchical in verse 2, as the simple and the necessary in verse 3, as completely empty and full of potential in verse 4, and in verse 5 as the emptied center without preferences. So the build-up to this verse 6 is quite real, preparing us for a revolutionary but rarely contemplated climax. We have been warned so many times against attributing anything human to Tao, but now, for the first time, we get a human aspect. Tao is, in words that we can understand, feminine to the core. At its depth of depths, Tao is a nourisher, a womb that births every frickin' particle, and that quietly, darkly, and through emptiness. So again, from verses 1 through 5, we see a repeated emphasis on the mystery of Tao. And here in 6, it's like Lao Tzu just throws in the towel and says, in essence, Tao is not understandable. Tao is uncontrolled by words. However, if you have to personalize it, here's my best shot. Mysterious feminine, the great mother, spirit of emptiness, spirit of the valley, the womb. Now, there are sexual connotations here for sure. This valley spirit isn't just a nature metaphor. The valley implies a concave, bowl-shaped openness between a female's legs. This valley, hollow emptiness is the womb of every possible thing. So Tao is not at all like a guy, some alpha male, swinging his junk and flexing his power as he swaggers around, planting his seeds willy-nilly. Instead, Tao is countercultural, subtle, concealed. Tao's strength is veiled, made known in emptiness, but an emptiness that, spontaneously and without any maleness, is brought into play and brings forth all life. From her valley come all things in heaven and earth. From her silence, emptiness, and hiddenness, every creation flows, and there is no end to creation's variety and diversity. Think of the flute and the bellows from verse 5. Tao's nourishing womb is inexhaustible. Tao's fecundity or fertility cannot be forced. You cannot just open a womb and force its operations. Tao brings forth all things in quieter, more subtle ways. Lao Tzu paints for us the image of the female body as an independent and quiet, non-forcing power or agent. No compelling, no place for male power or masculine characteristics in this Taoist metaphor. When my seminary professor taught about the virgin birth of Jesus, he said this: "The gift of God's incarnation had no need of a male." Lao Tzu explains Tao likewise. Tao's birthing process is not like masculine concepts of how to produce, processes which usually includes conflict. There's no machismo here. Tao creates through feminine emptiness, receptivity, inclusion, and care for everything born from her. Always generating, never finishing. Being nothing, she produces everything. Being empty, she is ever useful. Pure potential, yet nothing is left unaccomplished or incomplete. Two images may help here. Picture Tao as the great mother with an ocean's sheer fecundity, but ever dark and mysterious by our standards. Or two, as an ever-creating star nursery nebulae, just clouds and gas, but empty by our standards. In verse 6 here, there is no teaching about how a woman completes a man or complements him, or how the feminist principle needs a male to create. No vision of the feminine as lesser than. No extolling of passiveness or being receptive. Note what else is not here as well. There is no praising of our modern feminine values. No sheroism, bravery, feminine courage, being equal, or struggling for overdue justice. No Women's History Month. No. Verse 6 predates all this, which is incredible. The Mother Valley Spirit is the original way, or Tao, of the universe. Tao is feminine all the way through in ways that predate modern feminism. These 25 Chinese characters just make a basic statement about how creation got here, without ideology or a care about what we may think or bring to this verse. Still, to me, as one who is just plain tired of patriarchy in our spiritual traditions and the male dominance in matters of business and all that war-making, in a world where a woman is still considered a novelty or property, who still paid about 82 cents to a man's dollar, this verse takes us back to the beginning, to origins, and we may discover the empty feminine at the center. Natural, productive, simple, nourishing, profound. Do we listen?
Are you listening?
At its very inception, Tao is feminine. In their theory of everything that Tao Te Ching teaches, Taoists nursed no blind spot. The Taoist worldview assigns equal value to everything, little or big, obvious or subtle. Each particle of creation is a necessary birth, necessarily sacred, ordinarily blessed, and it all begins with the feminine. Ever button up your shirt, but you begin with the wrong button? And so up and down your shirt, your every button is in the wrong place? Maybe, just maybe, you started off wrong. Every spiritual text I know of, except for Tao Te Ching, begins buttoning its worldview on the wrong button, leaving out the first button of equality, the button of the feminine as a necessary first button. Without the feminine button in any spirituality, one will be off balance, ethically skewed, and a promoter of disharmony. To walk a spiritual or ethical path without the feminine is ever to limp. And in one's habitual limping, it becomes difficult to return to origins and begin the buttoning process again. However, we have good news. By inscribing the feminine in their sacred texts as necessary, sacred, central, Taoist started its spirituality with an emphasis on the mothering principle at the depth and at the beginning of all things. Its every button is in the right place. What we start with and where we start matters. Historically, as the Tao Te Ching text was emerging, women studied Tao and became Taoist leaders themselves and found their rightful place in China in the 4th and 5th centuries A.D. The poet for this episode's opening quote was a Taoist poet and mystic. Sun Bu lived in the 12th century A.D. She began her inner alchemy Taoist practices at the ripe age of 51, after she had raised her 3 children and lived a normal life. Sun Bu-er's diligent practice and great spiritual abilities earned her a high reputation as a Taoist. Her Taoist title was Calm and Clear Free Human, and she played a central role in the revival movement of inner alchemy Taoism. Sun Bu later became known as one of the Immortal Sisters, a term reserved for female experts of the practice. And she was one of the 7 great masters of Taoism. As Thomas Cleary has written, enlightened females were everyday common women, mothers, wives, daughters of officials who studied the Tao with such dedication that they ascended to the level of immortals, or the highest and most accomplished level of Taoist practice. No text-based spirituality in the world has, from its very inception, included, embraced, and relied so much upon the feminine, whether as priestess practitioners or as inclusive imagery. None. Even Buddhism today has trouble in its placement and displacement of women leaders. This cultural cultivation of the feminine is Tao's unique feature among the world's major religious texts. Taoist organizations employ female fertility as the way of Tao, and they generally treat women as the first among equals with men. And when you start your spirituality by buttoning buttons correctly, your practices are from the very start egalitarian, humane, and truth-seeking. Today's episode, like every episode, is meant to illuminate the exemplary features of Taoism that we can emulate and cultivate. If we are to address the prevalent militaristic perspectives that dominate our planet, well, may we all become as female as possible. Homework. Go outside several times this week and pick out one leaf. Examine it for several undistracted moments, and then pull your inner observer back and appreciate the tree from which it came. Imagine the creative intricacy and sheer organization it takes to birth the near 250,000 leaves that tree produces every spring and summer. Now, shift your perspective still further back and imagine all the trees in the grand forest of our world. How many trees is that? Billions? Multiply that number by 250,000 leaves. And finally, readjust your focus and see this process happening worldwide since whenever trees emerged. And each leaf is alike, yet completely different. Continue this exercise this week until your words are blocked by wonder, awe, and praise of the processes that fortunately we have no say-so in. Maybe this will give insight to Tao as womb. Now, Nancy has a question for us.
Mark, my question for you is, how would you say that the Tao is countercultural?
Thank you, Nancy. Tao is an early spiritual theory of everything. In this worldview, from the first instant of creation, the characteristics of peace, spontaneity, harmony, communication, and justice are already at work. Taoism teaches how everything is peaceably connected across time, across species, across space. However, verse 6 teaches how every particle of the universe has the same mother, the same womb. We are already brothers, sisters, relations, and our common birthright is a harmonious universe in which justice and peace are not just our primordial states, not just the original blueprints of the universe, but is the inheritance of every particle of creation. I, for one, cannot abide the theories that our practices of peace and justice are alien or unnatural urges. So how is this countercultural? Most explanations for the world's origins are male mansplainings, human-centric, hierarchical, out of touch with natural processes, and serve as foundations for our many violences against creation. Just to cite one biblical verse that is often used to justify violence against creation, see Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, often quoted in the resonance and the authority of the King James Version. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Quote, have dominion, quote, and subdue have fed an unfortunate tradition that establishes the seemingly God-ordained relationships of unequals. Humans against the rest of creation, men over women, spirit over matter. The Hebrew verb for have dominion also means to go downstairs and not stay upstairs. That is, walk among our neighboring creation as an equal and care for creation as one might imagine how God takes care of us. But translators of Genesis to this day choose words which shore up understandings that human beings are to lord over, control, subjugate. Most people today, I think, do not see anything wrong with this interpretation. But untold violences happen to creation, all because we see ourselves as special or over against. But don't worry, we're told. We live in a non-speaking dead creation. Ours is a victimless worldview. It is right here that Tao shows us countercultural power. The disharmonies and injustices in our world are not original, but artificial, false projections of our unexamined desires to promote, to compete, subdue, and have dominion. Tao is a countercultural corrective. Because our primordial connections with the universe are originally peaceful, originally blessed, originally nourishing, and originally peaceful powers, we may paraphrase Martin Luther King Jr. Inequality anywhere is a mockery of original justice everywhere. War is a mockery of original peace. Global climate change is a sign that original harmony has been forgotten. Tao exposes these counterfeit and artificial worldviews in our lives. The good news is as difficult as it is countercultural, Nancy. It goes against the grain and the comfort zones of our culture to celebrate our primordial connections with the ways of the universe. Yet nothing in nature prevents our connection. Just go spend a day under a tree or by a river, and you feel the connections. To celebrate you being in nature and nature being in you is a spirituality of resistance against the cultural norms of seeing nature as an it, a thing without intelligence, and therefore disposable. Instead, it is a celebratory but countercultural practice to envision and then engage in a Taoist spirituality whereby all that you encounter is already your womb twin. There is no place where, nor time when, we are not confronting our deepest relations. But make no mistake, to practice deep countercultural visions of original justice is no romantic project. It is not rainbows, unicorns, and woohoo stuff. It is a lifetime adventure, but an adventure that will get one misunderstood, stricken from social networks, fired or not promoted, and maybe even killed. To live as the fruit of Tao's womb, it's like we become Taoist wombs ourselves, empty of subjugation and dominion. To live as a womb, we remind violent societies of a pre-existent peace that reveals the bankruptcy of every violent status quo. These violent societies will not be amused, so consider the cost of following Tao today. This podcast is an original labor of love, designed, written, and co-produced by many, whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching is good news for today. Tao still speaks. Thanks to Nancy Hastings Hested for her voice in question. Artwork by Audrey Davis. The song Put Your Roots Down is graciously donated by songwriter and singer Molly Hartwell. The copyright for quotations from Tao Te Ching is held by Fortress Press. May your days begin in peace and become wombs for radical hope.